Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into our gasket kit. We're going to pull out the oil seals. And when I say oil seals, this is the upper and lower oil seal that goes around the crankshaft. We also have an O-ring here that goes on your dipstick. And we will be putting that on later when we go ahead and assemble the motor itself. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pull out the first oil seal that goes on the top. Now we have to remove this oil seal here. So what we're going to do is we're going to get a hold of an oil seal remover. You can get this any autos place that you go to shop for your parts, or any hardware store, they've got them. And what we're going to do is we're going to stick this part here inside the oil part, and we're just going to give it a pop out. And there it is. The oil seal is out, right like so. Now, making sure that you have no foreign matter inside where that oil seal needs to go, we're going to take our new one. Now there's a right and a wrong way to put this in. You want to go ahead and make sure that the part that normally has like a little spring at the bottom, it has an open part like this, that goes down. You want this part here at the top. Stick it on here like so, and then what I like to do is get a socket to fit right up over the top of it, and just pop it right in place. And pop it right in place where it belongs. Give one more little tap here, and there we are. It's in place. Now we've got a new oil seal in there. So that part of it's done. Now when we go ahead and bring the crankshaft through it, we're going to make sure that that's well lubricated so that would slide over the top of your crankshaft, so we don't cause it to be improperly installed, because it'll cause you an oil leak later. So at this point, we will go ahead now and install the piston. Okay, so now since we've got the oil seal in, now we're going to go ahead and assemble the piston to the housing on the motor. So the first thing I like to do, and I like to point this out, now if you look real close at your rings, you notice that gap right here? When you squeeze this ring together as tight as you can get it here, you should have a gap in there. If you don't have a gap in there, what's going to happen is these rings will not be the right size that you should have had for this piston. You need that in there so that you can have expansion to go up against the cylinder wall. If it's too tight, that means you're already too tight as far as you may be oversizing the cylinder itself, and it'll start scraping when you start shoving it in. Or you won't get these closed tight enough to be able to slide these rings down through the cylinder. So always keep that in mind. Always check, make sure you got a gap. And then also make sure that when you go ahead and assemble the rings, you don't want them sitting in line. You want them as an offset. Move this one over here, like so. Just, you can run it opposite side, over here, and then make sure that your rings here do not have the same gap as over here. So you want to move this one down out of the way, like so. So now we have all the gaps away from each other so they're not in line. And that's going to serve very well. Okay, the next thing I want to do is I want to go ahead now and I want to pre-oil these rings. And I like to get the kind of synthetic oil that you're going to use in your motor, which we're going to be putting in here next. And I like to just oil them up really good, give them a pre-lube, make sure that they're all nice and lubricated real well. Set that aside, make sure that you got enough oil all the way around. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to get ourselves, wipe the grease off my hands a little bit here, we're going to get ourselves a collar. And what this does, it compresses the rings all the way around the cylinder. So what we're going to do is we're going to stick this together like this, and we're going to ratchet it up tight. I'm going to set this down and we'll ratchet this up tight. It's nice and tight. Looks good. All right. Then what we're going to do is we're going to set this upright, and we want to make sure that our piston is in the right direction. You could put it in wrong and then you won't have the clearance that you need. So by facing down, we want this part here, the lobe, the end cap, to be, we might say, as a reference to the side where the exhaust is. Just like that. So we're going to go ahead now. We're going to slip this up like so. We're going to slip this in here like this. And what I'm going to do is get myself a little bit of a soft hammer like so. And we're going to find the hole where it goes in. Like so. All right, now we're in the location of the cylinder. We have the piston in its place, and it's not moving around. We have the rings compressed, and now we'll go ahead and bring them in, like so. And there you are. Now you have the rings into the cylinder. They were nice and tight. And we'll bring this down to the side right here. At this point, I'm going to remove that cap. So I don't want it in the way when we start putting that crankshaft in. All right. So now we've got the piston in. We have it in the right position where it needs to be. And now we're going to go ahead, and I said I wanted to oil up that O-ring, like so. And make sure we have a little oil. I don't know if you can see there, I put a little bit of oil on the crankshaft itself. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to stick the upper part of the crankshaft through here. Got to be very careful as we bring it through. Let me set that aside a little bit. Push that crankshaft up a little bit. I should say the piston rod will push that up a little bit so we have a little bit more clearance in there. And we'll slip it in. There we are. Crankshaft is in place. Now what we can do is we can push the piston down until we get it around the crankshaft, like so. And now we have the piston rod down in position around by the crankshaft. All right, now let me kind of move you around here a little bit and kind of show you a little bit more closer. Oh, like I said, this is a new camera. I'm just trying to learn it. There we go. So now we're going to put that end cap on. Put that over here. And there's a right and wrong way of putting this on. So kind of check. You see that this here has a slot here, but this one's on the outside. So make sure that when you line it up with your piston rod that you have the same grooves where they belong. And so I can see that it belongs like this. So we'll slip that on like that. And we will start that bolt by hand. You don't want to, you want to twist it up like so and kind of start it in place and get the bolts started where they belong before we go ahead and put them in there and torque them. All right, now that we've got the end cap on and I've got the two mount bolts in place, we're going to get ourselves a torque wrench here. We got a number 8 socket, and what we're going to do is set this at 80 inch-pounds. And we're going to sit that in here and try to grab, we had to have put an extension on here so we get down in where we want to get for there. So we want to bring this up until you hear it click. Right there. That's 80 pounds, 80 inch-pounds. Do the same thing on this side. Let's see, we got to move this a little bit down this way maybe. Like so. All right, we'll tighten this one up. Right there. 80 inch-pounds right there. All right, now we've got them torqued in at 80 inch-pounds, and now we're all in place. All right, now we've got our crankshaft in. We've got our piston and piston rod all assembled. Now we got to put in our lifters right here. These run off the camshaft. We'll stick this one in here. That one. And we'll put this one in here. Now there's nothing different about them. They're both the same. So now when your camshaft turns, it will ride up on these lobes. So now the important, very, very important part of this is making sure that you have your crankshaft timed with your camshaft. And if you look really close, and I know you probably can't see this, and let me see if I can do a little bit better job in showing you this. So now that I have you positioned a little bit better, you'll notice on the crankshaft, on the gear, you're going to see a timing mark right there. That timing mark. That timing mark has to be lined up with this mark right here. That's your timing mark right here. Sometimes they have a little notch on the outside on your gears. Sometimes they do that. But in this case, what they've done is they've put the timing mark right there. And what you want to do is when we go ahead and assemble the camshaft in, like so, we have to make sure that we line up those two timing marks, like that. See? Now we've got that mark there and that mark there. That is timed up. Now the camshaft, as it turns around, will operate properly against your intake and exhaust valves. So I wanted to show you that. Very, very, very important to make sure, because if you don't have those set, nothing's going to work properly at all. So our next step is going to be putting the governor in place. Now I had a comment in a past video that we did was, where is the slosh rod that takes the oil and sloshes it up underneath the motor and all the way around? All right, and this particular model, it's a lay-down model. It's a vertical shaft. It's not a horizontal. Horizontal shafts would have that extended piece of rod hanging off from the end cap, and that would, as it rotated, it would slosh the oil around. In this case here, we have a governor that is geared for the governor and also has these little splash fins on. These are the fins that splash the oil up inside the motor and around the crankshaft and everything else. So I hope that answers the question, that all we need to do now is slip this on like so, and we want to position it like this, and so that it's in the area where the governor rod will be facing. Now you're asking yourself, well, how is that going to stay in place? Well, when we go ahead and assemble the bottom half, it will lock in to the bottom part of this casing, and that will keep it in position. So the next thing we're going to do now is, I guess we're going to put a gasket on here and put it together. Well, now that we had the motor set aside, now we got to do one more thing with the bottom casing of the motor. We need to pull that oil seal out and put a new one in. So we get a hold of our extractor, get it hooked inside, and give it a pull. They don't come out that easy, like so. And we'll set that one aside. And then what we'll do is we'll get our bag that has the oil seal in it, and we'll take this one out. Now, we'll stick this on here, and one more thing I want to do, I guess that's the same size. All right, I wanted to check to make sure that what we're going to drive this in with was about the same size, because sometimes the upper and lower are in different dimensions. You may have a bigger one at the bottom and you may have a smaller one at top, but these both are the same size. So we're going to stick it in the hole area, give it kind of a push to get it started, and then we'll take this, we'll set this down so it's flat, and then we'll put our socket on top and we'll drive it in. Like so, nothing to it. One more time here. There we are. Got a nice seal in there. Everything's down in place and looks great. So we'll set that aside. And yeah, we'll give this a little bit of an oil bath so that we get this lubricated real well, because we want that to slip through. One thing you want to do is when your crankshaft comes through, you don't want this bevel edge to be turning out on you. You want to make sure that it stays nice and straight around that crankshaft, because that's what's going to hold back the oil. So now we'll set that aside, and we'll go get our gasket to put on the motor itself. All right, now we've got our intake valve done. Looks very good. See how that's nice and seated all the way around? And the valve in the seat inside the body itself looking really good. All right, so we've got that part of it done. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead now and put the springs inside here. We're going to put the springs and the locks in so that the camshaft now can push up and down on those valves. So that's what we're going to do next. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to back these two valves out. And then what happens is you get a hold of your spring, like so, put your lock cap on the back of it, slip it with the cap at the bottom, push it in to you almost to the lifter. Then what you're going to do is get yourself a real fine screwdriver, and what you're going to do is you're going to get it underneath the lock, put your bigger screwdriver in it, and then what you're going to do is just take the whole spring back over the locator, over your lifter. There. So I wanted to kind of show you here an example. I had to get out my valve spring compressor. I did one already, but I wanted to show you how difficult this is. What you got to do is you got to get a couple screwdrivers, and what you do is you're going to have to lift that bottom lock up. Now it's got a kind of a oval shaped lock in it, and what you got to do is you got to get the valve to go through that one side of the lock. It's not on center, it's off to the side. And once you've got that done, now you can put your spring compressor in the nest and bring it up. As you do it, and now we've got it up, and now we got to take the spring lock and slide it forward to get it to go in place. And I got to tell you, it's a real trick in itself. Kind of take a screwdriver and push it in place like that. And there we are. That one's locked in place. Yeah, and there was one more thing I wanted to mention. See those springs in there? You got quite a heavy wrapping towards the bottom. That's where you want the heavy spring winds, is at the bottom, and you want the light spring at the top. So yeah, always kind of make sure that when you go ahead and assemble, that right there, you want it looking like that and on there. That's your heavy part of the spring. And then the light part would go to the top. So I just wanted to mention that to you so you make sure that you get those springs in there right. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and assemble the gasket and head to the motor. We got 1/2-inch bolts, should be 8 of them. And what we're going to do is right here, we're going to assemble the head gasket on. We're going to put 1 1/2-inch bolt in the top, and we're going to locate it right here. Get it started. And we'll pick up another bolt. We'll put it in the bottom. Like so. Get that one started. And then we got to put the rest of them in. So you see there's a lot of work that's got to be done here. You don't really realize all the work that goes to putting a motor together. You know, and the more you do this, the better and better you get at it. And yeah, there are different size motors, and they all have their problems indeed. You got V-twins, you got single, and different horsepowers, and yeah, it's quite interesting to know all the different engineering problems that come about, and it's you to solve it. That's how it is. You become the doctor. And the more and more that you work with the product, the better and better you will get at it. I mean, when I started out in my dad's garage. And he had a shop, and I started building engines is what I did. And as I started getting better and better, well, I started getting into the other parts of the lawnmower and tractor industry. And yeah, I learned an awful lot, indeed, and it stuck with me all my life. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to run these down with an air ratchet. So let me get a hold of an air ratchet and set that up. All right, I got my 1/2-inch air ratchet, so let's snug these down. Whoa! Okay, so now at this point we're going to go ahead and get our torque wrench set up and set it up and torque all these bolts in place where they need to be. All right, we're going to have our wrench set up at 2 20-inch-pounds, and like I said before, we kind of vary where we torque our head down so we do it evenly. Grab a hold of your motor right there. Come underneath here. Up here. And down here. And let's see, kind of lose place where I was. Okay. And here, I think I get the one down below here. Check that one. And this one. And this one. There. All right, we got all the mount bolts torqued in. So there we are. Now the next thing we're going to do is we are going to put the flywheel on. That would be the next thing we're going to do. So let me set that up. All right, now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to check to make sure that we have our aluminum key in there on the drive shaft. Now, like I said before, if you happen to hit something hard, this will shear. That's why it's aluminum. It will shear, allowing the torque on this flywheel to spin. And that will decrease the amount of torque that you have on your your crankcase to make sure that you don't twist it. You don't want to twist your crank shaft, because that, you might as well say, is the end of the motor, because it's expensive. So that is why you always have a shear pin in the top. Now, you also would know that if you do shear this pin, your coil will not fire in a proper position that it should be when it turns. And that will tell you, if you ever have the situation where you've hit something, then all of a sudden you want to go ahead and start it, and it acts like it doesn't want to start. That's because you've sheared the pin. And that means you've got to take the flywheel off, replace it with a new aluminum shear pin. And then you will be back in the proper position where your coil will fire when it's supposed to. So now we've got that in there. We line up the keyway here, and we're going to have to put it over the shaft. Now remember, this has a brake on it. So we're going to have to bring the brake over all the way over as far as it goes, so we get that brake away from the flywheel. And so we put it on like so, and like that. See? Slides right on. Now the brake here, we can let that go. Now we've got the keyway in place where it belongs. I'm going to show you that. Right there. We've got the keyway where it belongs, in the groove on the flywheel. We got the brake set right here on the outside. So when you release that brake, it shuts the motor down with the complete ground to your coil. And then that stops your engine. Without that, that coil will keep right on firing and your engine will keep on running. Even though you got the brake, you probably would be able to stop it with this brake, but yeah, it'd be a little bit harder to do so. But yeah, okay, so now we're ready to put on the nut and torque that down. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead now and assemble the coil. Now, there's a couple things you need to realize about a coil. You want to make sure that the areas, the contact areas that go around the flywheel are clean. Don't have a buildup of rust all over it, because it causes an insulator between this contact and the contact on your flywheel. Your flywheel has like a magnet on it, and as it rotates itself, it goes against the coil, creating what we would call the AC current from DC to AC. So that is what delivers the spark to your spark plug. So what you want to do is, first of all, I like to rotate it like so and get it not onto the magnet, but put your assembly bolts in like here, screw those in, and we're going to screw these in, and let's see if we got the right socket here. No, we don't have the right socket for what we need. Let me see if I can find it. Here we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to snug these bolts down a little bit, not tight, but just so they're movable. Same on this side. Just so they're movable. All right. Now what you want to do is pick yourself up, which we will call a gapping tool. And I want to set this at 20 thousandths gap. It's what they call a feeler gauge. And I want to slip that in right here between the flywheel and the contact on the transformer. And what we're going to do is we're going to rotate this around until we come across the magnet part of this. And rotate this a little bit. Let's just get a good look at this. Okay, here's the magnet. On there it is, on there tight. So let's snug this up a little bit more. This one. And this one. Because what happens when the magnet comes around, it'll suck that coil right in place. Like that. And what you want to do is take your feeler gauge, 20 thousandths, slip it in here, loosen it up, and right away it's going to drop down against the contact of your feeler gauge and the contact right here of your coil. Tighten it up. Come over here, do the same thing. Put your feeler gauge in here, loosen it up, push it forward. There it is. Now pushing this one forward will loosen this one up to give you your 20 thousandths. Because we hit the high spot first, and now we should have 20 thousandths here. See? Here's your 20 thousandths, and you got your 20 thousandths here. They sometimes figure the thickness of, let's say, a credit card. I like to set them a little closer than that. And so we'll go ahead now and tighten those down. You don't have to be really tight, but I just like to snug them up like so. Just so you know you're snugged up tight. There you are. And then this ground wire that shuts off the coil goes down underneath and gets hooked up to the connector underneath. Just like this, we push it through, and you get it on the connector, and you just push it on. There it is. And then this little plastic will come over here, and it will hook up to your bracket right in there once you've got that hooked in. Okay, so we've got the flywheel on now. We've got our coil set for the spark. So it's just basically, we got to put the carburation on it now, and then we have to make sure we put the cover back on the valve cover. We got to put that back on. We got gaskets for that, so we'll put that on, and then we'll get that done. We'll get back. Okay, we've got the motor put back into the chassis, into the deck. We've done everything that we could do to make it possible. So now comes the most important time we've been waiting for. Is it going to knock? I don't know. We're going to have to try it and see if it will. All right, here we go. We'll pull back the brake. We'll give it a pull and see what happens. Holy moly, look at that. No knocking. Wow. Runs like a champ. Wow, that really makes me happy. It works. Well, let's give us a roundup on this mower and say we've done it. So let's go to the conclusion of what we're going to talk about this. Well, first of all, I wanted to get out of the shop. It was just hot and muggy, you know, and those darn flies lately are just crazy. But I wanted to get out and talk a little bit of what we did now together. We ripped the engine apart. We did our investigation on it. What we found was we had a buildup of carbon towards the top of the cylinder. So when the cylinder came up, it bounced off of that carbon, and that's where the knocking was coming from. So what we did was we tore the engine apart, we reconditioned the cylinder, we got rid of all the carbon on top of the piston, we put new rings in it. We went ahead and ground the valves, seated them. We did everything possible. We the valves. The valves were excellent shape. And we went ahead and put oil seals on the crankshaft, upper and lower. We went through and checked the spark plugs on it, made sure that that was good. We went ahead and sharpened the blades. We just gave it a good going over now. And you know, it solved the problem. So now you can kind of see what it takes. I mean, this is just a small motor that we worked on. When we get into the twins, the bigger ones, now there we have a lot of hours being spent in very complicated situations that we need to be in. So, like I always said, I hope you learned something from this video. I did for sure. I learned a whole lot. I didn't know where the knocking was coming from, and by gosh, it was that carbon. I could not believe it. But that kind of shows you that when your rings start wearing, oil starts seeping up around the rings, gets on top of the piston, and now you start burning that oil and gas together, forming all that carbon on top. Yeah, so if you kind of see your motor kind of smoking a little bit, if you're using a lot of oil, that's kind of a hint that maybe you might be having a problem down the road. So, I'm going to leave you at this point. I hope you learned a lot. I did. And in the future, we're going to be working on our next video. We're going to get back at that Cub Cadet. I want to get at the chassis underneath, start getting towards the hydrostatic back there and checking that out as well. I kind of miss working on that big one, but we're going to be getting back at it for sure. So like I always say, help your neighbors out because now you've got a little bit of knowledge. You do. Take care of yourself, and I will see you soon.